And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a returning good brother into the temple. Previously on here for Lone Wolf Fists, as well as the one time he was on for the Cloister with the same game. Now coming back to us with the Acid and Steel expansion for Lone Wolf Fists, bringing us both Hell and Metal. So half of the Power Up Metal albums that I have in my library. The one and only Joel Clark. How you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm doing all right, Mildred. I am caffeinated and ready to kick some ass.
So, I will admit that I've known that this is something you've had in the works for quite a while as the first proper expansion, but I have to ask a bit of a chicken and egg situation. Well, since both of these are dealing with different themes. The acid part is dealing with hell, the steel part dealing with machines. Which came first?
Of those two?
Yeah, which did you develop first?
Let me see. I actually kind of developed the idea of this expansion in one go. I'm going to cheat with my answer because it really wasn't a chicken and the egg. So I'm developing this as I do very frequently. I was powerfully inspired by Exalted. Exalted has this thing they do at the end of their line where they'll do the Alchemicals, which are the robot guys, and the Infernals, which are the guys from Hell. And they always do it at the very tail end of their product lines, right before that edition gets sunsetted. And it sucks, because you don't get enough time to really enjoy these awesome splats. So I thought, well, why don't I put those guys at the very, very beginning of my supplement run with Lone Wolf Fist? That way I can have the maximum amount of playtime with them. And also, like, for a little while, I've been wanting to do my version of like hell-based powers, and while I was developing Lone Wolf Fist, people were like, "Can I play a robot? Can I play a robot?" Okay, yeah, I wanted to put these dudes in the core book, but I mean, you saw how huge the core book was, so yeah, they actually got cooked at about the same time. Now, development-wise, I actually have finished the entirety of the power set of the Hell guys. And I am currently starting on the power set of the robot guys. So I hope to have that completed in the next couple of months. Mm-hmm. And that way we'll be very, very short release date on this one. I learned my lesson with the last Kickstarter, and I scoped this one appropriately. So,
yeah. Although I know you brought up the Infernals, but
I like the.
I will admit I saw a little bit of DNA of the Abyssals, and truth be told, the Abyssals and Infernals aren't too far removed from each other. In the sense that back in Exalted, the Abyssals were the ones who we're using corrupted solar shards through the Neverborn, the primordials who died but can't die.
Yep, they were just a little bit too big to die.
Mm-hmm. And
I really liked that idea.
You kind of have that with Naraka and the Leviathan. And maybe it's just me, but I get the feeling that the vision that you have of Naraka would be more akin to like Wayne Barlow's vision of hell.
Yeah, Wayne Barlow's a big visual inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, big time.
Huh.
And that's a really good comparison. If you've never, for our listeners, if you've never seen Wayne Barlow's depiction of hell, go look it up. They are the most surreal and nightmarish images since Hieronymus Bosch.
Yeah,
they're beautiful things.
And although we say nightmarish, we don't mean like you're gonna lose your lunch trying to look at it. It's not that kind of nightmarish, but more of things just making just enough nonsense.
Well, and there's a certain hostility to it. I wouldn't call it gory or stomach churning, but it definitely seems threatening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think hell should feel a little threatening, at least. Yeah, no, I don't want to just do a retread of the Exalted lore. The Exalted lore is convoluted in ways I dislike. But in the when they very first set it down, they got a lot of things right. They got the mythical feel right. And then later on, as they added details, there were a lot of hits and misses. Two of the hits were Autothon, which is the giant robot planet alchemical thing where the robot guys come from, and Malpheus, which I think was entirely written by Jenna Moran, or primarily written by her, because it really has her fingerprints all over it. And it was this surreal, weird kind of hell that's less. It's less fire and brimstone, and it's more like 1970s acid trip. I think acid fantasy is what it's called pretty commonly, and that's a really good description of it.
Yeah, I suppose I could also reference things like the face of a frog music video, which is just very strange, or
I think I've seen that one actually,
or some of the animation styles of Masaki Yuasa. Who
I'm not super familiar with Masaki Yuasa. You have to, I'm gonna look at
one of his early works, and one that definitely fits here was Mind Game, which
I've seen Mind Game. Okay, no, I know who you're talking about.
Which was basically him experimenting to see how far he could stretch the concept of animation and still get away with it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's a good description of that. It's a really good description there.
Yeah. Now, since Naraka is going to be dealing with beings in hell and essentially damned heroes, would it be safe of me to say that the seven Asura could kind of fit in the same role as the clans in normal One Wolf Fist?
Absolutely. Yeah, they very much are the clans of hell. They have their own, more or less their own philosophies. They have their own favorite evil virtues, I guess you'd call them. Because they're not just there's a line drawn between a vice, which is just indulging something that's kind of weak or sick inside of you, and then the sort of evil virtue you can have by being proactively wicked and destructive and showing strength. They have their own territory, which is made out of the particular Ashura, because they've got world bodies now that they're pseudo dead, and they make up the landscape of hell. So yeah, they and each one of them is going to have a hellish lore associated with it too. So you could actually, just like with the seven clans in Lone Wolf Fist, where you can go to their territory and adventure, and there's a huge amount of content that can get generated for that. It's the same way with hell. Once you go to hell, there's huge amounts of content. So it's literally doubling the size of the setting in terms of the content GMs are going to have access to. So yeah, that's a beautiful comparison.
Yeah, and the other thing is obviously because of the fact that we're not dealing with the post-humans that any member of the clans, anybody who's using the chakras in the core Lone Wolf Fist world is doing. That does mean a new approach. And
Well,
what
it's comparable.
Mhm. It's comparable, but
Like,
I do think there's a few new rules that you have to how techniques can work.
a little bit, yeah. I mean, like, mostly because like I knew I needed another power tier for the whenever you can turn into like a world,
Hmm.
like you need a new power tier, you know. So I have starting at the beginning, I got the formed style techniques, the novice, expert, master level, and supreme, and I categorized those really nicely in terms of like what I expected the scope of that power to do. So like, you know, form and novice techniques are very like, you know, throw a fireball kind of stuff, real simple, usable in combat stuff. Whereas the expert techniques are closer to like the Kamehameha wave. That's a bigger, more desperate, more powerful, and more dangerous attack. And then the master level stuff was kind of like what distinguished mid to late tier gaming from the earlier stuff you had access to. And then of course supreme stuff was like the really late game content. It was basically making you into a walking WMD. But the Ashura all have a peculiarity to the way they use their powers. They're not just kung fu styles you're learning, they're granting you access to their primordial power,
Hmm.
right? So it's not so much like you're training your body and becoming stronger. You're literally opening your soul to this super demon and becoming closer to it. And so you physically transform as you get these powers. And there's two sides to that. The first thing is that you usually in Lone Wolf as the core game, you gain karma from heroic deeds and you spend that uh, whenever you train and learn a new martial arts style, right? And in this one, you have a sort of negative karma, a karmic debt, if you will,
Hmm.
and you get that by falling into the thrall and into the debt of these Ashura, and they get more say and control over you as you fall further into their debt. They put what's called an Ashuric brand on you,
Hmm.
which in rules terms is just an imbalance that gets worse as you get more powerful.
Hmm.
And that's how you get their power. But in addition to that, the actual use of their powers changes you physically, mentally, and spiritually to make you more like them. So eventually, you completely transcend your humanity and you can become like this massive, sprawling landscape. Now, mechanically, that's not enormously different from just getting to late game and getting like a kingdom that
Hmm.
you're like exploiting for resources and raising armies and things like that. But in terms of the actual rules, your character sheet becomes that landscape. So that was some fun rules to write.
Yeah.
And then you still have the capacity to like more or less be a normal character. So you like make this mystical body called a tulpa that you're able to use to wander around with. It's like this like fiery idealized version of yourself, but
Hmm.
it really feels very transhuman. So yeah, they depart a little bit, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. And of course, you do have techniques that are working in a similar way. We mentioned that, uh, but I will. You also have a new archetype, which is the damned hero, which I think is
Yes.
meant to complement the base three hero types that are in the core book.
There's actually two new archetypes. The damned hero is the one for the
Hmm.
acid half of the book, and then the
Yeah,
artificial hero is the one for the steel half of the
yeah.
book.
We'll get to the
And
steel part in a bit. I just wanted to lead into
oh
the
yeah,
acid part.
oh yeah, absolutely. All right, so yes, this is the fourth archetype I've made.
Hmm.
Um, so it's the way I decided to put it together was I really want there to never be a point where you're choosing a character type that obsoletes previous character types. Like a lot of games when they go into their supplements, they kind of they over reward you for playing the new stuff. So you'll have an ongoing campaign and then someone will want to play one of these new options, even innocently, and it'll just be like head and shoulders more powerful than everybody else. And it's kind of it's kind of a crappy game experience, right? Like that sucks. So I
Hmm.
wanted this to be comparably powerful to the other archetypes, and I also wanted it to not be in their same niche. So I gave it a very different set of principles about how it worked. So like the cunning hero is about like thinking of creative solutions and using more limited resources in a more like efficient way, right? Like they're kind of about outwitting and outthinking people. The strong hero is direct and tough and is just able to completely kick ass in early rounds, and they have a compounding advantage because they've got a big effort pool. And then like the enlightened hero has all the magic go juice, so they've got a lot more early access to powerful magic. But that's all awesome stuff. And like so with the damned hero, what I wanted them to do was I wanted them to be much more tilted towards offense and much more and have like an almost like barbarian feel to them. So their actual stats are kind of mediocre, but they get ferocity dice to make up for their deficits, and they get a lot of health too. Like they're extremely hard to kill. Again, much like barbarians. But ferocity dice are interesting. They originally were introduced in the bestiary of the core book, and they're just the same as effort dice, but you can't use them for anything except for attacks and defenses. They're just meant to represent like a more animalistic, bestial way of doing things. And I gave those to like monsters and animals in the core book to kind of represent that, yeah, these things aren't going to be talking to you or anything. They're going to be basically, they're only going to use this as fight or flight. And so that's like an aspect of how damned heroes work, is they get ferocity dice, and they get a pretty good amount of them too. But they're rolling this kind of like separate pool, and the player always knows they've only got the option for violence with these. So that's really fun. Also, of course, you got the Osheric brand you have to deal with, which means every single round, your Ashera patron is going to have some demand of you, and you're either going to give them what they want, or they're going to cut off your access to their magic as punishment. So that's always a fun little line to walk as well. So yeah, they feel very different. They have a lot of raw power, but they have a lot less say in how it manifests. So it's a lot more chaotic to play one of these guys. So far, playtesting has revealed that they have a lot of offense, which is fun. They do tend to get their asses kicked a lot. Thankfully, I've compensated with a lot more health. So we'll see how that turns out when it comes to having a whole party of these dudes.
Yeah, and this is a bit obvious, and it's been brought up before. But if I suppose another visual depiction, if somebody wants to reference, is some of the more out there aspects of Kill 6 Billion Demons.
Oh yeah. Well, Kill 6 Billion Demons has been an inspiration forever for this project. I absolutely love Kill 6 Billion Demons. And if you're not reading it, you are incorrect.
Yeah.
You have simply lived a lesser life. Go read it immediately.
Yeah, but one of the big examples of just that bit of strangeness is just the appearance of White Chain.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good visual examples in Kill 6 Billion Demons. Let me see if I can find any.
And I know there's plenty of others, but White Chain is the one that I use frequently when it comes to bringing this up, because it's one of the first instances of that.
Yeah, White Chain is a really good example. And White Chain's inhuman aspects, I think, are really important for the way I want the damned heroes to feel. You really depart from humanity with a damned hero. It's less about being like on a path of damnation, and it's more about like being on a path of just abandoning your humanity for a totally alien set of principles and a completely different existence.
Yeah.
So,
and given that, would it also be fair to say that each of the Asura that you have, the 7 Asura, have their own equipment, their own chart and the like, much like the clans?
Yep, 100%. The current draft hasn't fleshed that out as much as I'd like. Right now, I've just got damned heroes, and I don't have the splats as fleshed out as I'd like to. But I was saving that for whenever I get the art back from Kazuki. I'm currently since we've got the Kickstarter coming up pretty soon, I'm currently writing down all the art needs, and I had to design the core characters for each of those, the little splat characters for each of them.
Hmm.
I'm stuck on Yamato no Orochi because my gender blend isn't great. I need one more girl, and I hate to make the girl the seductress one. I'm like, I've got to be. That's like so played out. I want to do something cooler than that. So, but we'll see if I can get back to that one. But yeah, each one of the different ashura is going to have like they have their own societies, they have their own cultures, they have their own landscape, they have their own god. So they very much have like something to give every player. You know, it's just as rich as choosing a clan. Like, and you played the Golden Lion
Yeah.
whenever we did Cloister, and
Hmm.
like you really got into the character. By the way, that was awesome to see. But like, it was clear you felt like a member of that clan. The heroism and like the weight that was placed on you, the expectations placed on you from character gen were like really clear. And I
Hmm.
feel like everyone gets that, you know, like it's the same thing with the Brotherhood of Freaks. It's the same thing with the Silver Phoenix. Or especially the same thing with Radioactive Scorpions. Like everybody intuitively gets what they're about. They feel right. And
Hmm.
that's the feel I go for with the Ashura too. Like I really want to let you indulge in that like energy with these different bad guys.
Hmm.
And I sent you a version of the early document. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure that's bleeding through with the flavor and the writing and the power sets, you know? Like they really do something that speaks for them.
Hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. And that brings me to the steel part of Acid and Steel. Uh,
Yeah, robots, baby.
so not just robots, but robots that are just as much they're just as much supernatural as they are mechanical. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I suppose if I were to based on how it's described, I suppose if I were to channel a visual equivalent, uh, possibly stuff like Asura's Wrath or some of the more mechanically inclined Wuxia and Tianxia that I've seen over the years.
Well, for me, like the big visual thing was Battle Angel Alita, like
Hmm.
that whole manga. That's kind of what I want to go for with them,
Yeah.
where there is something kind of familiar and human about them, but they're so clearly not human beings. You know, they're very much robots. Armitage the Third did stuff like that too. There's a couple of really good sources for that, but really, if you really want to know what I'm going for, it's like basically 100% Battle Angel. Like that is absolutely the energy I want with these guys.
Yeah, and just as a bit of context, since I'm not sure if you had played through Ashura's Wrath when it was in the running a few years ago. Um, this is
What was the last? Yeah, sure as Wrath. I remember I was playing it a lot whenever I was very first
yeah.
developing the system.
I'll
God, I
just
loved it.
I'll just give that as a bit of reference.
The
But
soundtrack rips on Ashura's Wrath too,
mhm.
by the way.
But the point is that you have something that's humanoid but also very mechanical, but you couldn't put it in like a hard SF kind of setting. Uh,
Yeah, I don't think so. I think you kind of need magic to make these robots work.
mhm.
Actually, one of the I think that the art for this is in the document I sent you. One of the mainliners is very inhuman looking. He kind of looks like
Mhm.
what's that robot thing from Fully Cooley? Like that thing. He kind of looks like that. Where
Uh,
he's got like my guy's got like an engine block for a head instead of a TV, but it's kind of the same thing where there's
mhm.
something like he's humanoid, but he's very much a robot. But still, you're gonna have that same thing like with Ashura here, where uh, there's something magical and transcendent about it. It's not just that it's a robot that fights; it's that it's a robot that fights, and it's kind of got a soul.
Mhm. And I suppose another one I might bring in, even though it's not as magical, although that could be up for debate, is blame.
Oh yeah, blame is another huge thing, especially with the setting of Babel Keminar, which is my answer to Autochthonia. It's
Hmm.
huge floating robot island prison paradise thing. Blame is gigantic for how I wanted the setting to feel. Um, it's because it's huge inside, you know, it's both claustrophobic and it's tremendous. Like there's something about the environment in Blame that is it's so inhospitable. It's like transcendent architectural brutalism.
Hmm.
That's exactly the vibe that I wanted. I
Well,
want if you go outside of the Great Nations in Babel Kiminar, I
hmm.
want it to feel like an absolute trial. Like nothing here cares even a little bit if you're alive, and a lot of it wants to kill you.
And the the funny thing about that is Tsutomu Nihei, before he became a mangaka, he was an architect.
Yeah, I could
And
absolutely see it. Like
and
Blame is such a love letter to architecture, especially brutalism.
and I've stated that that manga is one that I don't think can be adapted into an anime. I know it's been tried. I'm aware of the movie that was that was put on Netflix. But the
I wasn't
problem
aware of that
is
movie, but
the pro it has the same problem that, say, The Road did, which is another one of my, I won't say whipping boys, but another one I bring up in terms of things that are purpose built to work in one medium that can't work as well in other mediums.
I think Watchmen got that a lot too. That complaint. Although I do
Uh,
think the Watchmen movie is okay. I think I generally agree that it was sort of designed specifically for comics. I'm with you on Blame. I don't want it translated in other medium. What's the
well,
point? Like I
here
already have the manga.
here's the problem and this is the reason why I bring up The Road. A large amount of both works is built around atmosphere and mood making. And that's
Hmm.
something you have a lot more
Absolutely.
control over in a book than you do in a film. You know, something that you can spend half a paragraph's worth of text describing can be summed up in a single frame in a film.
Yeah, and it's like trying to turn Finnegan's Wake into a movie. It's like what are you even doing, dude?
Hmm.
Blame like okay, so the big experience of Blame, if I had to like give you like a very single bullet point that I think is the experience of Blame, it's turning the page and sitting in awe of what you're seeing for several minutes, even if there's no dialogue and no action.
I've said
That is
the best way to read Blame is complete silence.
absolutely. Yes, that is correct. That is the correct way to read Blame. You need to be in a quiet, empty, vast place with just enough light to read, and then you need to just flip the pages and just absorb them in religious awe. That's Blame. And I don't even know why would you even try to translate that? It would have to be 300 hours long, right? Like that's the only way you could do it correctly. Is just expecting someone to be like in a prison box
Mhm.
somewhere or in an isolation pod somewhere with no sound and just slowly watching this unfold in front of them. You could do it in, like I've been playing a lot of liminal games to get into the right headspace for this. Which by the way, there's some great ones on Steam right now for very cheap.
I'd
And like
also
those
recommend
come
listening
close.
to the soundtrack from the Katsi movies. You know, like Koengan Katsi.
Ooh, yeah,
And
you have to
just
link me to that bad boy because that sounds like it'd be very useful for
oh
writing the setting when I get there.
yeah, I'll probably end up Philip Glass, who's the composer for those movies, is a very
Oh,
underrated composer.
I love Philip Glass, dude. That's
Uh,
awesome.
if you watched if you watched Watchmen, you heard one of the tracks that he did, which was Prut in Goe and Prophecies. Uh,
Ooh,
I think it
good
was
watch. I actually watched the Watchmen movie in theaters 3 times. I liked
mhm,
it so much.
yeah, but it's I've used Philip Glass's work whenever I wanted to illustrate like the weirdness of magic in a setting that I was working with at the time, and I did the same thing when it comes to Numenera, which, as far as being that level of all over the place, is a nice parallel in a lot of ways.
I need to grab a copy of Numenera.
Since I've seen a lot of people debate about whether Numenera counts as fantasy or sci-fi, and both sides are missing the
Ooh.
point. When
Yeah,
the
I think you're right. I think that it's kind of drawing the question about whether or not there is a difference, right? Like that's kind of the setting of Numenera. It's
the
kind of a
the central idea with Numenera was taking Clark's law and pushing it to its furthest extreme, where the line between the two is so blurred that you can't say one way or the other.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, no, that's fair.
but now, with that in mind, for artificial heroes, what would harmony be the equivalent of?
All right. So and harmony is one of the stats they have to deal with. So
Hmm.
both of the archetypes in this expansion have to decide how human they want to be, right? They have like the characters in the core book are undeniably human. They might be mutated humans or psychic humans or whatever, or even evil humans in the case of the Shadow Vipers, but they're human.
Hmm.
There's never a moment when they really lose that, even if they transform into like demigods or demons or whatever they can do. Like you can, because you can do that in the core book. Like mastering those kung fu give you all kinds of powers that could kind of dovetail into transhumanity. These things are more than that, though. From a how I experience the world, what my morality is, like that kind of setting, the things that make you fundamentally a human being,
Hmm.
these creatures have not only a choice, but like a constant temptation one way or the next. So with harmony, what that's tracking is because you're an artificial being as an artificial hero, you're 100% robot, but you've got these chakra nodes inside of you, so you have the capacity to become more human over time. The way you do that is by you learn these transcendental martial arts, and they change you body and soul into a hero and a human hero. You just happen to have a robot body. Um, Contrasting with that, you have an alternate path of ascension. Because you're made out of the raw mechanical and pseudo scientific magical stuff of Babil Kiminar, you can grow closer to it too. And Babil Kiminar is transcendent in terms of being this clockwork god thing. So with that, what that's measuring is instead of learning martial arts, or as in addition to that, you can install these augmentations that change your body. Like they give you like a drill for an arm or a missile pod or wings or, extra
Hmm.
layers of armor or whatever. But you are treating yourself more like a robot than a person. And as a result of that, the more of these things you put on yourself, the further you distance yourself from humanity. So that's what that's tracking. It isn't so much that it's making you like inhuman in a monstrous way. It's making you inhuman in terms of you're treating yourself less like a person and more like a tool or a machine. And that's its own kind of nirvana, really. You can become transcendent in that regard and be like a perfect functionary for your society. In a lot of ways, the kind of quasi communist or anarchist societies that exist in Babil Kiminar sort of want to push you that way. They value utility because I mean they live inside of a giant clanking clockwork god's innards. So utility is paramount in their world, and they think in terms of like societal efficiency and that kind of thing, and in terms of a limited and unrenewable set of resources. So being the perfect tool is kind of like being the Buddha there. But just like with being a Buddha, you're not really experiencing the human condition anymore. You're doing something very different. So that's kind of what that's tracking. And
Hmm.
again, it's represented very simply with the same imbalanced mechanics that like, any of any of that kind of stuff is in my game. So I,
Hmm.
I really I'm a huge fan of imbalances for that. They're such a great catch-all.
Oh yeah, and given that, there's also the um, augmentations aspect to really go into, since we brought up the Autochthonians and some of their charms back in Exalted Second had this motif that several of them were augmentations that you would install onto your person, and I'm guessing augmentations here in a similar vein.
Absolutely. Yeah, augmentations. because there's two different kinds of powers you can get as an artificial hero. You can get augmentations, which are literally placing these new robotic parts onto your body, and then you can just straight up learn magical martial arts like any other character. Um, and you actually have two very different routes of power there, and you can blend them as you see fit. As I think the blend is more interesting than going all one or all the other.
Mm-hmm. And now we mentioned the different god bodies in Naraka as Hell's equivalent to clans. With it on the steel end of things, what would be the equivalent of clans there, or would there even be one?
Oh, I disconnected for a second. Can you repeat that?
Uh, so when it comes to this machine god of a place with Babel Ki Minar,
Mhm.
what would be the equivalent to clans for them?
Nations. The three great nations are their equivalent of clans. Um, Obviously, one of them is based on the sort of Orwellian 1984 like police state world where it's hyper authoritarian and it's all clamped down and like a nightmare version of super communism. But in addition to that, I've got a very cyberpunky one. Actually, I should probably give you the names of these.
Mhm.
The super authoritarian one is called the People's Fist, because I named it, so of course it has to have fist in it somewhere.
Yep.
It's just I had to sneak it in. Got to sneak that fist in. Then I've got the Dragon States, and they're much more cyberpunk. They're closer to Brave New World, and they're more Huxley-ish, where they don't control their populace with a fist. They kind of just control them softly. So they do a lot of like drugging the populace and a lot of like auto hypnosis and things like that. So they have a lot more variety, but there's also like a sort of moral and spiritual degeneracy going on with them. So they're much more punk. So they've got a very neon radical kind of energy to them. And then heading further south, I've got Mammon, which is the only society in which the robots are kind of in control. Basically, you have these ascendant like machine nobility, and they rule over like what is effectively a serf caste of human beings that work for them. And so they have something like a mercantile state of like landed robot lords who they don't own land in so much as they own like factories and workers, but it's kind of the
A
same thing.
plutocracy.
Again, yeah, it's very much a plutocracy. So yeah, those are the three ones I have, and they all have their own unique martial art. Very uniquely about the societies in Babil Kiminar, unlike the ancient martial arts that are available in the broader world of Ashes and Ghosts, these are all martial arts that they had to pioneer because they didn't bring any with them. So all the three different states have their own kind of mystical martial art that's totally unique to that setting or to that nation,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not as powerful. They don't actually have supreme level techniques. As a matter of fact, they only have a very small amount of master level techniques. So the general way that they get really transcendently powerful is by integrating in with Babil Kiminar, and it's very rare that anyone gets any more powerful than that master level of kung fu. So
Mhm.
it's going to be a real shock whenever they open up to the broader setting, because the like WMD level explosive stuff, like that's already hugely destructive and in the open air setting of the world of Ashes and Ghosts. But there's all these cascade effects that will happen if they're unleashed within Babil Kiminar that could legitimately end their world. So that's going to be a scary moment for them.
Mhm. And given that, since they aren't able to reach that higher tier, what would they have to compensate? Because when you mentioned not being able to go to the higher tier, I immediately thought of um, the dragon blooded and exalted, and how in terms of raw power, they're outclassed by most of the other exalts, but what they're good at is being team players.
Yes, that's true. So they can, and the Dragon Blooded kind of have the ability by cooperating to get kind of close to what the Celestials can do.
Hmm.
Um, so that limit placed on them is only a setting limit. Like if they actually like, let's say that like the world, Babil Kaminar crashed into the world of Ashes and Ghost, and they just left and they went to join the clans. They could learn the kung fu just like anyone else could. They just
Hmm.
don't have access to it where they're sequestered right now. So that's not a hard limit on them.
Yeah.
And so there is actually a path of transcendence that they've not had access to yet that they can get access to in your game whenever you run it.
Hmm.
So that's really fun. But in addition to that, their augmentations have different tiers to them. The one you primarily have access to is the one where you have like a gun for a hand and that kind of stuff. But
Hmm.
as you grow larger, you can increase the size and the dimensions of your chassis, which is kind of like the core part of your body. And you can even make it into non-human frames. So you can just become like a huge robot eventually. And you can even turn into like a vehicle. And again, eventually, you can turn yourself into this whole factory city where your actual character sheet is this larger, more docile set of like terrain, basically, and then you make little robot clones of your old body to go and adventure with. So one of the great things about pioneering the turn into landscape power
Hmm.
for the damned heroes was that I didn't have to do it twice to make the to make it for the artificial heroes. I can use the exact same rule stack, so
Yeah.
that saved a lot of time and effort.
So one of the forms is basically just late stage Factorio play.
100%. Yep. Yeah, and that's very congruent with the way the Lone Wolf Fist core book does it too, because like eventually you can get into domain management in that game,
Hmm.
and so these are just an expansion of those rules, basically,
Yeah.
allowing you to be the land and the king, baby.
Yeah. Now, what? Jeez, yeah, had to channel Bruce Campbell there for a second, didn't you?
Always.
Yeah. Now, obviously, one of the other aspects, and one that was very important to the Cunning Hero, was the secret arts. And do you plan on expanding that concept? I know you kind of did with some of the supplemental material that was at the back end of the core book, but
Mhm.
within Acid and Steel, do you plan on expanding what could potentially be taken uh, with those sort of masteries?
Ooh, actually, I hadn't thought of it so far. I had a couple of ideas. Although I'm not sure if they would dovetail well with this project or not. Like I had an idea for like because one of the great things about doing 7 of them in the core book is that
Mhm.
it kind of invites you to think of new ones. I was thinking like an art of the musician would be really cool. Um to do like because that's a trope that happens in wuxia a lot is like having like deadly music and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um and of course there's always like all this galaxy of like magical musicians and all kinds of different fantasy I could draw on for that. Um, I've already got art of the artisan. I was thinking like maybe art of the mad scientist. Do something a little more like a little more very specifically like zany and scientific would be really good.
Hmm.
Um, I hadn't considered it in detail yet. I've been so obsessed with like these different power sets that I haven't actually gone and thought about like if I want to do more secret arts or not. Just largely because the secret arts in the core book are really comprehensive. Also because like I don't know, I'd want to do one. I would really like to do one that was particular to Hell and one that was particular to Babilka Minar, but I'd have to put some thought into it. You got my gears turned on that one. I actually
Hmm.
hadn't thought of it before.
Yeah, I figured it was a matter of course to ask that because
Oh, that's a good question.
the martial end of things is going to be expanded just by virtue of these two new settings and these two new types of hero, quote unquote. So for those who would want to still lean into the kind of things that the cunning hero um, is doing, best to throw them a bone because
Yeah, you're not wrong.
the selling
Thinking
point with
about
the
it.
cunning hero is that they can get access to more secret arts than anyone else.
Yes, this is true. And the secret arts are really cool. I loved them when they showed up in Legends of the Wulin, and I feel like I did a really good job translating them into the post-apocalyptic setting. Like, I feel like you really can, sorry, I really like the Art of the Doctor. It's weird to think that what was my least favorite in Legends of the Woolen became one of my most favorites in Lone Wolf Fist. But there's like there's a whole archetype, right? Like right in Fist of the North Star with like guy who is a doctor. It really works for the setting. So yeah, goodness, I'd have to think. I really need to think like what I want for the secret arts to be for Hell, because like I've already got an Art of the Sorcerer, which kind of covers necromancy. I don't know what. I guess you do like Art of the Warlock, maybe. What would that do? I wonder. I gotta think about it. I guess you could work with the hellish elements. That'd be interesting.
For as I brainstorm it myself, there is one word that keeps coming to my mind. No matter how many times I try and work around it, and that word is Hell Priest.
Hell Priest.
What we're supposed to call Pinhead, according to Clive Barker. He doesn't like people calling him Pinhead, but I think he's just given up on that.
Well, actually, that showed up in one of the books too. Oh, was it the Book of Blood? I don't remember what it was called. Oh no, it was the Scarlet. Damn, what was it called? It was one of his more recent ones where he acknowledges that people call him Pinhead, and like the actual character is mad about it, and people use it to insult him. So I thought that was kind of a funny way of owning that.
Yeah. And I have regardless of what some people think of his books or his films, I have a healthy respect for Barker because he was one of the early people in that particular circle to grasp the value of video games as a storytelling medium. Even came close to throwing hands with Roger Ebert once. Over that.
Yeah, of all the people to throw hands with, Roger Ebert's one of the titans. Mm-hmm. I have such a complex relationship with that man because I really do respect his mind, but I also utterly disagree with him on video games and David Lynch, two of my most beloved pastimes. And Ebert was 100% incorrect about both of them.
Wait, did you think I meant verbally throwing hands?
It's even better that Clive Barker was like, "I'm gonna punch that smile off your fat face, Ebert." God, I love Clive Barker so much.
Yeah, he got very close to being physical with him.
You know what? I can see it. Ebert seems like a real punchable kind of dude. Again, I admire him, but I wouldn't mind punching him once or twice. It's too bad he's dead. But
there are these stories about how sometimes him and Siskel would get on each other's nerves. But
sometimes.
I suppose
every single show.
I suppose I look at that as in the same vein as how, okay, maybe not to the same extreme, but the relationship that Herzog had with Klaus Kinski.
Oh Jesus, that's a really extreme relationship.
Well, did you ever read My Best Fiend?
No, but I know how those two work together.
Yeah,
volatile doesn't begin to describe it.
Yeah.
Dealing with Klaus Kinski, dealing with Werner Herzog, God, like Klaus Kinski is really edgy, but I don't know, man. I don't know if I could deal with Werner Herzog.
I could probably handle Herzog. Kinski, it'd be a case of someone just hanging back with a stopwatch, just waiting to see how long it takes before a hockey fight breaks out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that whole story about with one of the films they were on, where the local natives in Peru where they were filming were actively considering putting a hit on Kinski.
You know what? That doesn't even seem unlikely to me. That might just be rumor, but I 100% believe it.
I think Herzog outright confirmed it because he brought it up and said, "No, please don't kill him yet. I need him for the rest of the film."
Sounds about right. Oh God!
But Herzog rationalized it in that having somebody who he clashed with allowed him to push himself to make better work.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, you don't want to creatively stagnate. Don't get into an echo chamber. Absolutely not. That's the worst thing you can do as a creative. Never get into an echo chamber. If you find yourself agreeing with your creatives, add someone to the team that you do not agree with. Trust me on this, people.
Hmm.
I actually invited someone to work on this one with me. That I very constantly argue with and bicker with over like rules, concepts, and things, because I knew for a fact they would add something like a live wire to it. So there's actually additional writing in here for going through Babil Kim and R that comes from them. And I'll give you the bomb on that once we get back to the Kickstarter. But yeah, no, they wrote some really hot stuff for me, and I knew they would because it's not something I would ever have written.
Yeah, and there is precedent to that. I mean, I'm a big fan of 13th Age, and I know Heinso and Tweed disagree with each other constantly, even in the damn book.
Oh yeah. Oh, you know, 13th Age has that energy, but 13th Age is also brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the best version of 4th edition that ever existed. And 4th was brilliant too. People crap on 4th big time, but I got to tell you,
I'm
was
going
a solid game.
I'm going to revisit 4th in a musing one of these days, and more specifically use it as a case of being a victim of propaganda.
100%. It should never have been a D&D, but it absolutely is a worthy game.
As far as whether or not it should have been a D&D, that is something I will address, because I've discovered a bit more nuance when it comes to that, and I wanted to examine what exactly defines that whole thing of whether or not something should have been name a given IP. But now shifting to Acid for a moment, there is one issue I could see happening when it comes to stuff like the karmic debt and the encouraged behavior that comes with. And that is how you can have people who are operating on the same page, or worse, how you avoid the that guy encouragement of like the Great Curse. It's always a risk when you're doing enforced behavior in role-playing games.
Well, that's true. One of the strengths, I think, of doing it the way I'm doing it is that it very much centralizes who has the final call. The problem I always have with the Great Curse is that it was designed by the player for their character, but enforced by the system through the GM's fiat. That's awkward, right? With this one, I designed the enforced behavior, and the GM is the one who determines how it manifests. They've ultimately got the kill switch on it. So what they're doing is they are judging, like they're kind of sitting in the place of the Ashura and judging whether or not this character is doing what they are demanding of them. So that makes it feel more like a monstrous and kind of inarguable authority is forcing you to do something, because that's how it's designed to work within the paradigm of the table. You know, the GM is already that. And any GM worth their salt, especially one for this like rollicking beast of a game, is comfortable with calling the shot on whether or not somebody forced their character to hurt enough, because that's just what you do with every imbalance. So since I already had a strong mechanic that kind of taught GMs how to do that, and like made the relationship of player motivation and description versus, you know, GM ruling very clear, I think we're going to avoid that problem. I think it's going to be pretty clear whenever someone is like doing something monstrous enough to count for one of these things. And in a lot of cases, they are almost purely mechanical. It's like you have to use one of your sets to do a particular action. That's a binary. You either have used your set to do that or you have not. You know, and in a lot of cases, because it's centralized at the beginning of the round before anything else takes place, a lot of cases you just hand that action to the GM and say, okay, do what you got to do. You know, easy as that. And that way, there's no worry about like, oh, am I crying enough for this exalted curse manifesting? Am I being robotic enough in my role playing? Dude, it's right there. What you need to do is a mechanical choice you made at the beginning of the round. Done. Resource spent. No drama.
Yeah, I've And when I refer to that guy, I'm also referring to what I've called the paladin problem. Because
Well,
in
tell me
all of
about the
those
paladin.
huh?
Tell me about the paladin problem.
So stop me if you've heard this one before. Some asshole GM puts the paladin character in a fall or die situation where they either violate their code and become a blackguard or die.
Oh, jeez.
Or the and
I've been that paladin a few times.
and it
I've got a lot of dead paladins under my belt.
it doesn't have to be the paladin per se, but that sort of if you do this one thing, you lose your character's benefits. Um, Third edition had this quite a bit with how it treated alignment systems, where if you do something that was outside of that alignment, and as an aside, treating alignment as a moral system was a mistake because it's not built for that.
Well, it's literally called alignment, which is to say, like, whose side you're on. You know,
Well, it was the if there's
who are
if
you
there's
aligned with?
any game that I think understands the concept of alignments from as far as the whole law and chaos thing, aside from the originator of that concept the Moorcock's work, it's honestly the Shin Megami Tensei games, the core ones,
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a
because
really good example,
the
actually.
law and chaos factions have their associated demons, but they also have a consistent theme within the Gaia and Messiah cults, or whichever reincarnation that they're in, depending on the game in question. The law faction prioritizes order, but can lean very easily into authoritarianism. The chaos side tends to talk about freedom, but borders on anarchy. Uh, and that's always consistent when it comes to the characters that are represented with those two sides. And
Yeah, and they give you a good set of like the benefits and drawbacks of both approaches. It incentivizes you to find a middle path. I always really liked
well,
that
the
a lot
best
about
ending
it.
in a Mega 10 game is usually taking the middle path.
Hmm.
It's also the hardest. It's typically the hardest ending, but it is the ending you can take.
All right, and it's not so much that it's a binary like coin flip thing. It's two poles,
Hmm.
right? And you can veer towards either one, but there's an enormous amount of freedom about like where you are on the spectrum. I think whenever you look at like when you look at real moral law in our actual world, they very much have to track as close to a binary as possible. Either you do the thing or you do not do the thing. You either commit the crime or you don't commit the crime, right? And that's because we have to make judgments about like what society is going to do to punish or reward somebody with these things, right?
Hmm.
So that spectrum is that's it's not utility, right? But in terms of like, did this action benefit Napoleon's forces or did it benefit like whoever he's fighting's forces? Like that's a more nebulous question. If you're not strictly fighting for either army, but you're like some third party in the exchange, and like you have loyalties that are like shifting between either depending on how it benefits you and how it serves your goals, that's a totally different paradigm, right?
Hmm.
So when it comes to the paladin problem, my game does have its own morality. Its moral code is if you do things that are dangerous and difficult but serve the greater good or serve like a noble end, then that benefits you. And in this supplement, like I have the question of like, well, what is sin in this regard? Because there's bad guys in the core book that are nonetheless like held to a sort of their own sort of heroic standard. It's an expression of like raw
You're
power and
thinking
will
of
within
Rao.
them. Well, yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of ways, the Shadow Vipers and Rao have a lot in common. Rao's whole philosophy is might makes right. That's the core of his philosophy. And that's what the Shadow Vipers are all about. The strong are born to prey on the weak. That's how it's supposed to manifest. So
Hmm.
showing weakness to them is a sin, and showing strength is a virtue. But there is something kind of redeeming in that in the real world. Like, it's a sort of militaristic way of looking at the world. So there is something, there is good to be gained from that. You are safer under a Shadow Viper than you are outside of any territory. Like, it's way more chaotic and unpredictable. Like, yeah, you might be a
Much in the same
slave
way
or
that
something.
you're technically safer in the prison settlement in The Walking Dead than being out in the wilderness.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly how it's a post-apocalyptic setting. It can be a little bleak. And the Shadow Vipers are unquestionably the bad guys, right? But they have something to say for themselves in a practical way. You know, on the other hand, the transhuman evil that is offered by the Ashura does not give you that guarantee. It's very personal. Their societies are filled with the dead and the damned.
Mm-hmm.
Demons made from the raw primordial stuff that was kind of rejected by the universe of humanity. Like, literally, my Ashura were all vanquished by humankind, and that's how they wound up in hell. You know? So that's the mythology there. And so when you choose to align yourself with that, like, there's a sort of, like, revenge energy that comes with that. Like, these are heroes that didn't realize their potential. They fell, and they fell into envy, and as a result of that, like, they're very wrathful, they're very primordial, they're tapping into what should really truly be forbidden powers. There's something toxic about them. There's something failed and fallen about them. That's a compelling ass character to play, but it also means that, like, in terms of morality, I don't have to worry about the paladin problem. Like, you are indebting yourself to demon gods. Like, you can kind of expect to be screwed over as a result of that. Like, you don't make a damned hero like, this is all going to go my way. No, it's going to suck, and it's going to suck because it was your choice to play it on hard mode.
You are making a deal with the devil. Quite literally.
You are actually making a deal with the devil to play this character, and the devil will get his due. So I don't feel like I don't even think that we're even looking into something that's going to give you a paladin problem there.
Yeah.
It's so clearly a hostile and opportunistic arrangement that, like, if you choose to remain moral in the face of that, the game is already designed to reward you for heroic and difficult deeds. And it's also designed, if you're a damned hero, to punish you for your transgression against this cosmic evil. So that's really compelling gameplay, and it's all solidly designed so that you're consistently making the choice you want to make, and the consequences that flow from that are cleanly defined. You can tell I've played a lot of paladins.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that. Now, with that,
isn't that comprehensible?
Yeah, with that in mind, what are you shooting for as far as a page count?
As far as a page count, 250 pages is my goal. Hopefully, it will come in a little bit smaller than that. I've gotten better at writing things since the core book, and I've gotten really good at, like, squishing things down so that they're not, like, taking it. One of the big complaints about the core book is all the empty space. I actually took a couple of classes to do layout so that we're not going to have the empty space problem anymore. I'm commissioning different styles of art from Kazuki so that I'm going to have, you know, like, little streamers on the side of the page and things that make it nice. And ideally, I'm going to get 250 pages or less. That's actually comparable in size to the core book, but I think you probably noticed this looking at the draft I sent you. The type it's a bigger size. Like, the core book type is very, very small and cramped because I was trying to cram, like, what is really a 400 plus page game into 300 pages or less. And in this case, I'm actually making something that's a little closer to what I wanted the core book to be in the first place, which is, like, a bolder typeface, less empty space, a tighter layout, and then just generally more efficient writing. The core book does have a lot of efficiency in it, but there's a couple of places. Now, I look through it now, I'm like, okay, I bloviated here. This could have been clearer. This could have been bullet points. I'm taking those lessons and I'm applying them here. So hopefully 250 pages or less. Like, I'm gonna kind of bust the budget if I go over 250 pages.
Yeah, and when do you see the Kickstarter going live?
Going live on the 1st. It's going to be all through December. It's a Fistmas gift to me, baby. So feel free to reward me as much as you want.
Yeah,
I will come back with another absolutely balls out amazing game for you all to enjoy. I promise.
And I'll certainly be looking forward to that. But
hell yeah.
With that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way back to the temple and enjoy the madness that happens here.
Oh, I love the temple, dude. You run a fantastic temple, Monk. It's always my pleasure and privilege to be here.
And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!